What's up, guys? My name is Jake Savage and I'm a recreational endurance athlete. And I just finished IRONMAN Maryland like 3 weeks ago, and I hit my goal of sub 11 hours, which I was super pumped on. Got 10:48. And so I am making this video for two reasons. One, last year I did Ironman Wisconsin and my goal was sub 12 hours, which I hit. And I had discovered some things during the training journey that I think made a huge difference. I made a video of that, how I finished an Ironman in sub 12 hours. And way more people than I was expecting discovered that video and got some value out of it. By the way, if you're somebody who used those tips and hit your goal, that's awesome, and I'd love to hear about it. Let me know. So this year, kind of the same thing. I'm hoping that you guys can get some value out of this since you did out of the last video. And if you hit sub 12 and now you want sub 11, awesome. Hopefully this helps. Two, it's kind of the same thing. I actually stumbled across three huge things that I believe helped me to achieve my goal this year. Things that either were not like readily available on YouTube or they were scattered, so consolidating them here. And I think that these will be helpful for a lot of you because most of us doing Ironman races are totally strapped for time. And that was the case this past year. If anything, I did not have more time to train. I never surpassed, I think my heaviest week in terms of volume was 13 hours. But on average, I was clocking like 8 or 9 hours a week for training. Main reason being like 3 months ago, I guess 4 months ago now, my wife and I had our second kid, which means we've got 2 under 2. That was just brutal for training reasons. And obviously couldn't leave my wife hanging, while I went for these like five hour long things, at least not without having my throat slit in my sleep. So training was like not a huge pillar this year, but I do have, and it's a baseline for all of us. All of us should be training. So the things I'm going to share are like extracurricular basically. But I should say one thing about training. I'm still using the same app that I discovered a year ago, which says a lot. I'm paying a good amount for it because I believe in it. They're not paying me to say this, but it's PKRS.AI. I'm a huge believer in this app. It takes all of your data from Garmin or Strava or whatever you use and creates a custom plan just for you. All right, so the three things I discovered are things that I think helped me to become a lot more efficient with my time and increase my body's efficiency and ability to perform. The first thing was my fuel. And I've got this bag here, Flow Formulas. This introduced me to liquid fuel. So beforehand, I was just using goos, using gummies, whatever, and just following like the standard 60 grams of carbs an hour. In reality, we actually need if we're gonna be working out for longer than 90 minutes or 2 hours, our bodies actually need closer to 90 grams plus carbs an hour. And this is backed by plenty of scientific studies. There's a great book by Angie Ash called Fuel Your Body, where you can read more about this. I started an endurance podcast about a year ago called How Far One Can Go. And I was lucky enough to have a dietitian for military special ops teams come on board. Her sole job is helping to prepare these soldiers for like suboptimal environments to be out there for hours or days on end with like minimal resources. She confirmed a lot of the stuff that you can find in these books and the scientific studies out there, that there are three things we really need when it comes to endurance: carbs, sodium, and hydration. And so I took her advice and stuff that I read out of that book and found online, and sure enough, I started to feel like $1,000,000 after my super long rides and runs. I had never felt that way before. I'd go do a 20-mile run or I'd do a 100-mile ride and I'd come back feeling like peppy and able to play with my kids or just do whatever instead of feeling totally drained. I thought I was feeling drained just because it was intense exercise. But in reality, that's one thing, but it's mostly because of poor fueling. So I bumped up my carbs from 60 grams of carbs an hour slowly to help my gut adjust to 90, and then at the 90 grams of carbs an hour. And then during Ironman Maryland, I was consuming 100 grams of carbs an hour. Seems crazy if this is new to you, but I promise you, if you try this, just at least try it. See if it works for you. I think you're gonna notice a difference. And then sodium. A lot of us are taking in like a recommended 500 milligrams of sodium an hour. That might be fine for you, but I learned that I need closer to 1,000 at least. And so I was taking in 1,000 milligrams of sodium an hour, 90 grams of carbs again, and water. I was just beforehand drinking like a 16-ounce water bottle an hour. I bumped that up to 20 to 24 ounces of water per hour. So these three things are what that dietitian recommended and made a huge difference for me. I noticed it all throughout my training and especially the day of. The second thing, which made a huge difference for me, was nose breathing. Sounds a little goofy just even saying this out loud, but nose breathing. New Year's rolls around this year, and I get a text from a buddy of mine saying, Happy New Year's. I just read this book. I think you'll really love it. And this is the book. It's called Breath. It's largely about nose breathing. The author shares this study that was done by one of the trainers from the New York Nets. So this guy discovered the benefits of nose breathing and started training all of his professional athletes to switch over to nose breathing. And he conducted his own study with pro cyclists, which sounded great, because we're doing the Ironman. And I thought, oh, okay, this is my lane. I'm going to give this a shot. But he conducted this study with pro cyclists where they got on trainers for, I believe, a full hour and had them slowly ramp up the wattage over the course of that hour. And he was measuring how many breaths they were taking and what their heart rate was during this time. And then he repeated the study, asking them to only breathe through their noses. And all of the athletes were able to pedal at the exact same wattage as they did before with a far lower breath rate. And because they had the far lower breath rate, their heart rate was able to stay much lower than it was before. So on average, the athletes went from 47 breaths a minute when they were breathing through their mouths to 14 breaths a minute when they were breathing through their nose. A huge difference. And that was able to keep their heart rate low, meaning they could crank out more watts at a lower heart rate, or for us doing the Ironman means go further and faster, expending less energy. This is a pretty easy experiment to replicate. It's not like I'm drinking the Kool-Aid, buying into something that sounds a little bit lofty or out there. And I actually went and tested this myself on a trainer and immediately noticed the difference. In February, right after I read this book, my cycling VO2 max, at least on my Garmin, was I think like 56. And then over the course of 6 months, I was able to boost that VO2 max 10 points up to 67. Now I know that there's a margin of error on Garmin. On the Garmin Phoenixes, at least, it's like a 5% margin of error. So even if it was swinging on the high side before, maybe I wasn't 56, I was 58. And then let's say it was on the low side 6 months later, it wasn't 67, it was 65. That's still a pretty big gap, even if you account for all the margin of error. And I attribute a lot of that just to nose breathing. And I was able to go in and conduct these FTP tests breathing only through my nose, and was able to increase my FTP test from like 260 is what I was cranking out before back in January up to 316 was my last one, at least, which was like 3 or 4 weeks before the Ironman. And if you're sitting here and you're thinking, okay, sure, like the nose breathing slows your breath rate down and brings your heart rate down, but why? Why does that work? Again, I'm gonna try to stay in my lane in terms of all this science stuff. But two of the things that stood out to me were, first, increased lung volume. So when you're breathing through your nose, you're exercising your diaphragm more, which helps you to expand your lungs more, so you're just getting more oxygen in. And then second, nitrous oxide. Nitric oxide. I don't know what nitric oxide is. I just know that it's like good for your muscles, and you only get it in your bloodstream when you breathe through your nose. So this nitric oxide helps to provide like a boost. Same thing as beets. If you've ever tried beet juice, and it talks more about, I think, nitric oxide and giving your muscles a boost, you get this through your nose. Your body creates this naturally when you breathe through your nose, and it doesn't happen when you breathe through your mouth. So bigger lung volume, more oxygen, and nitric oxide. So anyways, I would encourage you to test this for yourself. Watch what happens to your heart rate and your wattage when you switch from mouth breathing to nose breathing. It may take some time to get used to. I had always heard these stories of like boxers going for runs, and they would hold water in their mouths just to force them to breathe through their nose. And you had to hold the water in your mouth and not swallow it or spit it out. And so I remember trying that, and it was like brutal to even run 1 mile.
I've heard stories before of boxers that will train by holding water in their mouth and running like a few miles to just breathe through their nose, to practice getting oxygen through their nose. Been thinking about that on my runs. Gonna try it now. Take some water, start with a mile. This will be the first test. We'll see how it goes. Okay, I think a little tough, keeping the temperatures in the 30s, but made a mile. Try 2 miles another time.
But I got up to 5 miles.
Whew. Okay, 5.5 miles.
And then I could eventually just go for forever, only breathing in through my nose. So I would highly recommend reading or listening to this book, Breath by James Nestor. And then the third thing, I did drink a little Kool-Aid. for this one. It's a plant-based diet. There's two camps for this. You've got sometimes scientific studies showing that a plant-based diet is helping, and there are some Olympians and pro athletes getting behind it. And then there are other people who are eating meat that are outperforming the Olympics, or Olympians are doing just the same. So I guess it kind of comes down to preference. So I'm not gonna dive too much into the science behind this one. I'm just gonna share my personal experience and what I noticed from it. But the reason that I switched to a plant-based diet wasn't even for performance. I knew nothing about it. I was a die-hard salmon eater. It's that 5% Norwegian from Ancestry.com that I got. I loved eating meat, grilling all the time. Anyways, one of the things I do is I train this guy who's almost 500 pounds. And we discovered back in February that he had type 2 diabetes. And so I started researching how to reverse type 2 diabetes and a bunch of stuff out there. But one of the things I saw was a plant-based diet. So I start cooking this guy that I'm training. I'm cooking his lunches. I choose to cook him a vegan lunch every day just to see what's going to happen. And
Pretty good.
that's all you got? I'm eating these meals with him, and I start to really enjoy them. And I thought to myself, could I do this? Could I at least challenge myself to try to do this for 7 days? And so I did. And I was like, okay, I kind of like this. Maybe I can go 30 days. And so I went for 30 days. And then I thought, maybe I'll just do this all the way through my Ironman and see what happens. So for the last 7 months, I stuck with a purely plant-based diet, and I think it helped me tremendously. So the 3 things that are associated with the plant-based diet that I drank the Kool-Aid about. Number 1, increased muscle efficiency. Number 2, increased blood flow. And then number 3, anti-inflammatory. And sure, there are meat-based diets that are anti-inflammatory, but this was a big deal for me because in February I was going to physical therapy for tendonitis in my hamstring, and nothing was really working, and it was killing me on a lot of my long rides and runs. And within 3 to 4 weeks of a plant-based diet, I felt nothing anymore in my hamstring. So I became a believer. I was drinking the Kool-Aid. Anyways, those are the 3 things that I believe helped me to become more efficient with the training time that I was allotted, essentially, and ultimately helped me to reach my goal of sub 11 hours. The fueling, 90 grams of carbs an hour with 1,000 milligrams of sodium, 20 ounces of water, all liquid, by the way. Then the next thing was the nose breathing, bringing that nitric oxide into my system, more oxygen into my system, lowering the breath rate, lowering the heart rate while being able to increase the power output and the wattage. And then lastly, the plant-based diet to help increase the blood flow, at least that's what I believe, and anti-inflammatory and coincide nicely with the nose breathing. All right, so that's it. Those are the 3 things that I believe helped me. If you're gonna give them a shot, I would love to hear back from you, how they work for you. But other than that, that's it. That's all I've got. Get out there, keep training. I'm gonna go swim because now I'm gunning for sub 10. It's gonna happen. I'll see you guys later.